Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Today is Friday, September 16th, 2022. Hope you're having a great week. Hope you're having a great Friday, and I hope you're going to have a great weekend. We've got lots of content for you today at Hot Air. Big story that actually broke last night, and I wrote about this morning, which was that Trump actually did win his battle in court, at least for right now, to have a special master appointed to review the materials that was seized from Mar-a-Lago to make sure that the FBI does not have any sort of privileged material. And this is, of course, a setback for the Department of Justice. It's unclear as to just how well this is going to work for Trump. It is a tactical victory, and it does delay things a little bit for him. It delays the process of the investigation the Department of Justice is doing, something they complain bitterly about in this challenge to the seizure of his materials. They also appointed Judge Raymond Dearie, which is a very interesting development in this as well. Dearie was the judge who approved the final surveillance warrant on Carter Page as a FISC judge, a FISA court judge. And both Trump's side anyway, is the one who actually proposed Dearie for this position. The Department of Justice went along with it. And so the judge apparently felt pretty comfortable appointing Dearie to this. Dearie is retiring, so he's not going to have any stake in this. Apparently, he's going to become completely inactive at the end of this special master appointment. And so he doesn't really have to worry about whether or not this is going to impact his career or not. He's in his 70s. He is going to be gone anyway. I do think it's rather interesting that the Trump team appointed somebody that was connected to the FISA court issues in the Russia collusion case, and that the Department of Justice would have gone along with Dearie, knowing that he's probably pretty sore over the way that the FBI and the Department of Justice misrepresented the facts in that warrant application. So, I mean, I think that there's going to be some really interesting things that are going to take place in this. Plus, Judge Cannon is actually not just limiting this to the questions of executive privilege and attorney-client privilege, but also she also wants Dearie to settle the issues of classification and declassification, whether or not that this material was declassified. This is sort of the entire predicate for the Department of Justice, and they were the ones that were hoping to be able to settle that matter themselves. Donald Trump was on our friend Hugh Hewitt's show yesterday morning, talking about the fact that he had formally declassified all the material that was in his possession. We'll see. Dearie will have a lot to say about that, probably, though, not until the end of November. So this is not going to get settled before the midterms. It was a bit of a surprise, I think, to some observers who thought that Trump's demand for a special master was somewhat specious. I had said all along that I didn't understand why the Department of Justice didn't provide for this right up front, knowing that there were going to be issues about attorney-client privilege, about at least claims of executive privilege, and I'm not so sure I buy into the claims there. I think Andy McCarthy's probably right, that executive privilege expires at the end of a term, and that it retains to the office, not to the individual. However, that's never actually been fully adjudicated, and this may end up at the Supreme Court on that point alone. Very interesting stuff, and we're going to keep an eye on that. Lots of interest today in the Russian-Ukraine war. Interestingly enough, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi scolded Putin publicly. They were holding a joint presser, I guess, and scolded Putin publicly about the war, saying this is not the era for war, and urging him to bring the war to a conclusion through negotiations. Putin said, well, he's been trying to negotiate with Ukraine, but they don't want to negotiate with us. They don't want to negotiate on the basis of Russia retaining any territory in Ukraine, which is the reason why Zelensky is saying it's not time for that. Another really interesting development today, two interesting developments actually in the Russian-Ukraine war. First off, apparently Ukrainians are starting to target the city of Kherson. There was a report this morning from Russian sources that they had successfully targeted a meeting of leadership, occupation leadership, I should say, in the city of Kherson. and they provided the video of the explosions. Apparently, there were 5 HIMARS artillery rounds that were fired at this. HIMARS being extremely accurate. They knew exactly what was going on, so they got pretty good intel as to where these people are at in the city. Russians are chalking this up to terrorism, but I find it interesting that they're reporting on this at all. This is RIA Novosti, which is a state-run media outlet, which is running the video of this. And they're trying to put this out as proof of terrorism, but I think that Russians might be sophisticated enough to ask how artillery rounds, how artillery systems got close enough to Kherson in order to do this in the first place. And do terrorists really have artillery, or is this a war between two armies? I don't think that that's going to be quite the win that RIA Novosti thought it might be, but we'll see. The question of whether or not there's going to be negotiations extends now to Germany. This is the other big development. Germany seized 3 Rosneft refineries in Germany. They were joint efforts. Rosneft is the Russian oil company, and they operated these 3 refineries. Germany seized those refineries from them today, and to ensure their energy supply for the winter. And they're saying it's temporary, but my guess is that this is going to be a long-term seizure, and that they're going to probably buy out the other commercial partners. And the Shell Oil was wanting to sell anyway, and I think the German government is probably going to buy those out and make sure that they retain control. So those are very interesting developments. We'll have more. The Institute for the Study of War at understandingwar.org, by the way, is a really great resource. If you're not following it there, you should probably do that. I link to it quite often, both in my posts and on the headlines, which, I'm now running. So I get a chance to do all that kind of stuff. And I think you'll find it to be an excellent resource. Other big stories today, of course, the Martha's Vineyard story is absolutely hilarious. We've got a number of different analyses of this. You've got David Strom writing about it, Karen Townsend writing about it. You're going to have John Sexton. By the time this gets up, John Sexton will have written about it. He's got posts up. There's more posts in the hopper about this. The absolute meltdown on the left from having illegal immigrants land in Martha's Vineyard, 50 of them, and how this is a humanitarian crisis when the Border Patrol is releasing thousands of illegal immigrants into El Paso, into Brownsville, into other Texas cities, is absolutely staggering. And the Martha's Vineyard airlift didn't come from Texas. That came from Florida. And those were Venezuelan immigrants that were let into Florida, and DeSantis sent them over to Martha's Vineyard. There was also some that were sent to Kamala Harris's house at the Naval Observatory. And so I believe it was either Karen or Beej Wellborn that wrote about that. But either way, we've got more on that topic because it's a huge issue. It's going to keep unfolding probably for days, politically speaking. And we're keeping a close eye on that. Also, David Strom has a post that just went up as I'm recording this about the IRS and Janet Yellen's descent into apparatchik status within the Biden administration as they expand the IRS as the foundation of government, as I believe Yellen said, or at least that's the quote that I pulled out of David Strom's post. So go read David Strom's post. David Strom, this is his first full week at Hot Air, and he's doing great. We've gotten a ton of great feedback about David's posts. And don't forget, I've got my VIP video series with Adam Baldwin, the Amiable Skeptics. We had our second episode yesterday. The next one will go up on Monday. But don't miss this episode. We talk about forgetting 9/11, forgetting history, and the issue of how we are seeing each other as enemies rather than opponents, and we're seeing our enemies as opponents rather than enemies. Why that is and where that's going to lead. Adam Baldwin, of course, my good friend, as well as a very well-known figure in entertainment for decades, shares his thoughts on that, and amiably so. we're always amiable on the Amiable Skeptic. So I hope you get a chance to watch that. Coming up now is my conversation with my friend Libby Sternberg, who's written a new novel called Daisy, which takes the Daisy Buchanan character from The Great Gatsby, one of the great American novels of all time, and imagines what her life is beyond The Great Gatsby. It's a interesting conversation. We talk a lot about The Great Gatsby. We also talk a little bit about one of my favorite novels, Herman Wouk's The Caine Mutiny, which I think is one of the underappreciated great American novels of all time. And so we have a great conversation about that. I hope that you enjoy. It's a perfect conversation for the weekend. Looking forward, we're also going to be talking with Harry Crocker about his Western novel. That'll be later next week. And I've got other things in the hopper. Of course, we've got Andrew Malcolm on Tuesday, Dwayne Patterson on Thursdays. Yesterday's show with Dwayne Patterson was a hoot. I hope you get a chance to watch that and much, much more. Plus, I talk about how CNN has made lemonade, and even Don Lemon is making lemonade. That's a post that will go up this afternoon as well. Have yourselves a great weekend. Don't miss a minute of the Ed Morrissey Show, and stand by for Libby Sternberg. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Joining me right now is one of my friends from way back in the blogosphere, Libby Sternberg, who has a brand new book out. Now, it's one thing to write fiction, Libby. I tried it early on in my writing career and tried it a few times, and I kind of thank God every single day that nobody actually ever read any of that stuff.
Oh, come on. What kind of fiction was it?
Oh man, genre fiction. I tried science fiction. I tried detective. I tried a detective novel. I mean, and then there was one that you couldn't even classify. I mean, I guess just literary fiction wasn't terribly literary. But and then I discovered blogging, and
which is better than fiction.
Thank God I discovered blogging and could make a career out of being a writer after all. But you've made a career out of being a writer. And look, I mean, I ended up writing a Star Trek ripoff, an Ellery Queen ripoff, and ripoff of something that nobody would ever claim. You are tackling in your new book. I'm leading all this. I'm leading people all this to this. You are tackling F. Scott Fitzgerald. And I gotta say, Libby, you have got guts. I'm telling you right now, with your new book, Daisy. I mean, this is a great idea. First off, I mean, it's the obviously it's one of the greatest of American novels. So you got a great foundation here. Mm-hmm. Plus, it's a literary character that's really almost legendary. I would say between Daisy and Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, which, by the way, for full disclosure, I loved The Great Gatsby, and I did not love at all Gone with the Wind, but recognizing that she's one of the most well-known, feminine
female characters
in American literature.
Yes.
I mean, this is really starting at the top. I mean, congrats to you.
Well, I guess, first of all, the character of Daisy is not as realized in the book as Scarlett O'Hara is.
Yep.
Daisy is actually in The Great Gatsby an appendage to the men. It's really the men's story. Nick Carraway narrates it. Then there's her husband, Tom Buchanan, who's kind of brutish. And then, of course, there's Jay Gatsby, who loved her so much that he stalked her. Right. He was like a stalker.
Yeah, it's really interesting to read this, a century later, right? Because I had read it when I was younger, and I was impressed. I really enjoyed it. Then my son was going through high school, and it was a required reading. So both his mother and I read the book over again. I was like, wow, this is great.
Yes.
But that kind of came into my mind at that time. It was like, these days we'd say, creep alert.
Yes, he buys a house across from her. Yeah. But the book I loved the book too the first time I read it, which was probably when I was in high school, and then reread it over the years and read practically everything that Fitzgerald wrote after that. He in Gatsby, the thing that I remembered most after I read it wasn't the plot. I would have been hard pressed to tell you the plot after I read it. It was that sense of yearning that he captured, that great sense of longing. There's a German word for that, Sehnsucht. And I felt that it pervaded the book, and I just loved it, as obviously so many people have since then, although it was not a bestseller when it came out originally. So I've been a writer for a long time, but it took me a long time to give myself permission to write fiction. Because I thought of it in terms of that's an area for people who went to Ivy League schools or elite creative writing programs or move in that milieu. So
well, I just assigned it to people who actually had talent for it, which clearly I did not. So
well, I didn't start writing fiction till I think it was in my late 40s, or writing it seriously. And by that I mean taking the time to learn about the business and to learn how to craft long form fiction. So it took me that long to work up my courage to do it. So when Gatsby came into the public domain last year, I was fearless by then. I'd gotten rid of all my fears about what I could or couldn't write. And I loved the book, and I thought, wow, now it's in the public domain, so you can use the characters to write your own book. There have been a couple of books that have come out since then, one about Nick Carraway, a novel. And
I was aware of that one, yeah.
And there's another one called Beautiful Little Fools by Gillian Cantor, which I haven't read either of them yet because I didn't want to influence myself when I was writing. But that one is about the women in the story. But I just thought, hey, it would be cool to hear Daisy's voice, to hear who she really was, because in the book she's like a cipher. You don't
She's
really
an ideal. She's an ideal, and
yes.
she is a flawed ideal because of her lack of courage in the end. You mentioned Beautiful Little Fools, and I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Promising Young Women.
No.
It's actually really good, and it's played by the same actress who played Daisy in the Baz Luhrmann version,
which I liked, actually.
Yeah, I actually, Baz Luhrmann's movies are kind of a mess. His Elvis is more of a mess.
Yeah,
but I actually did sort of enjoy his Gatsby. It was a little over the top and wretched excess. But in the movie Promising Young Woman, I am struggling to remember the actress's name. She's a very good actress. I can't think of her name at the moment. But she actually quotes Daisy in Promising Young Woman by saying, and it's the line about beautiful.
Yes.
I hope that my daughter is a beautiful young fool because
beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, that was another thing that struck me about Daisy when I was going to write my book, is when you do see her or hear her in The Great Gatsby, she's always or often saying something very clever, like, do you always wait for the longest day of the year and then miss it? I wish my daughter was a beautiful little fool. And so she comes off to me as someone who's quite intelligent, but who might mask that under cleverness and does that in order to please the men in her life. So my book is about her transition from being an appendage, being just someone on the arm of someone, to deciding what her own future is going to be.
Yeah, I always got the sense too that she was more or less a in Fitzgerald's writing, she was more or less a device.
Yes.
And part of that is because Fitzgerald himself had the experience of not being good enough to marry somebody's daughter. That was part
Right.
of the thing that was driving him in
Yes.
writing this book.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, Daisy was just the unattainable ideal. It
Yes.
didn't really require a lot of fleshing out, other than the fact that she had to be an unattainable ideal that was worth everything that Gatsby put into this.
Yep.
Really, like, got all the money in the world, but without Daisy, it's, you know, it's nothing. So you have to make her into sort of an idealized person. How
Right.
difficult is it in your book, Daisy, to make her into a real flesh and blood, three-dimensional character who's, you know, you know, also we have to remember that she's trapped in the context of her time too,
Right.
where she doesn't have a lot of other options other than to
Mm-hmm.
play into this sort of masculine created role that she's trapped in. And
Yes.
she's trapped in it as much as anybody else is in Gatsby's, in The Great Gatsby.
Well, I think, first of all, I think there are some analyses of The Great Gatsby that see her as an avatar for the American dream, riches and position. When I started writing her, I had a general idea of where I wanted to take her. But as I wrote her, she became more and more real in my own mind. So it didn't become difficult to make her real, because you're constantly thinking of, okay, what would she do now when confronted with this circumstance? And I think some of her struggles in my book are still felt by women today. And I know that Hot Air is a conservative blog. I think that conservative women can identify with some feminist themes. I mean, I think it's a mistake to be dismissive, in fact, of some feminist concerns. And Daisy, of course, is a creature of the 1920s, so there are some struggles she faces that women don't face today, like managing her own money, having access to her own money, that sort of thing. But she also faces some stereotypes or negative descriptions of women. So women are not seen as assertive. A man might be described as assertive or forceful, but a woman might be called pushy or aggressive. A woman who's smart and articulate might be called intimidating. I mean, I know women who have gone through that in the workforce, who get evaluations with those kinds of words, where you have to think, if it were a man, there'd be more flattering adjectives used.
Right. I mean, I'll go back to my own experiences in the corporate world, and this is something that used to frustrate me. And as a conservative, even, it used to frustrate me that, you know, if you had women who were in managerial or executive roles and they were tough, you didn't call, they weren't called tough. They were referred to as the B word, right?
Yes, I was thinking that.
Sometimes with admiration, but most often not.
Yeah.
However, if you had a male boss who was just as tough, tough, he's a tough guy. Yeah, he's kind of a hard-nosed guy. He's, you know, he's a little tough to deal with. He's a hard-nosed guy, that sort of thing. It's like, well, okay, she's a hard-nosed woman by the same standard.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, and I mean, I don't think you need to be a liberal to understand that there has long been a double
Mhm.
standard applied to women in the workforce and in other places. I would argue, of course, that things are tremendously better uh,
Oh, yeah.
since Fitzgerald wrote the book. But again,
Yes.
you're still in the milieu of the era of the Great Gatsby when you're writing Daisy, and I think,
Right.
and yeah, I think to a large extent, even though you're in that milieu, there's still going to be things that and not just women who are going to relate to the obstacles, the hurdles that she has in front of her. And quite frankly, if you've read Gatsby, you have to wonder whether or not she even mounts. I'm sure she does because you're writing the book, and that would make it interesting. Whether or not you have to wonder in Gatsby's telling of Daisy whether she's even got the um the character to push back against that, the character to resist that, or whether she's
Yes.
just going to remain passive her entire life and let the powerful men around her um you know board her up and keep her isolated. So
Right. Well, that is one of the decisions or challenges that I have her confront, because she eventually has to decide, would she be going from one gilded cage to another
exactly,
if
yeah,
she left Tom to go to Jay. And not only that, she'd have to worry about her daughter. And in my book, she does love her daughter. She does not want her to be a beautiful little fool. And
no,
she
that was
has to,
clearly a lament of hers. That was a lament. It wasn't
yes,
her dream, it was a lament.
yes.
Yeah.
And she worries about whether or not she'd be able to keep her if she left a very powerful, rich man like her husband. Would she become an Anna Karenina, in other words? So,
Right.
But I loved writing it because, as I said, I love Fitzgerald, and it felt like I was writing fan fiction.
Well, but I mean, there was a sequel written to Gone with the Wind too. I mean, I'll just throw that in there. I think
Oh, yes, that was awful.
it
I'm
was awful,
sorry.
right? But this isn't. I mean, that was sort of the official sequel, right? That was the one that
Right,
was
right.
Margaret Mitchell's estate sort of blessed it. And
Endorsed, yes.
anything that goes through that kind of a process, you can pretty much guarantee it's not going to be worth it.
Right.
Um, so I mean, you're on your own on this, and you're taking your own cues on this. And I will say this too, and I think that this is something that I think it's obvious if you're looking at Gatsby, getting to your point about gilded cages. And the moment that she realizes that Gatsby's going to be a gilded cage as well is when he refuses to allow her to acknowledge that she loved Tom.
Oh, yes, that is a big point in the novel, that he just wants so badly that she didn't really love him, that she just, I don't know, married him what, on a whim or something.
Yeah,
But he really wants that.
well, but it's really and Gatsby's very Fitzgerald makes him very sympathetic in this, even though he's
Yes.
he's not, even though he's kind of, you know, sort of organized crime figure, which
Yeah.
you discover. He
Yeah,
makes him very sympathetic because, of course, he's a stand-in for Fitzgerald himself and Fitzgerald's
exactly.
own inadequacy, right?
Hmm.
And I would give credit to Fitzgerald for having this be a conscious decision on his part, but the fact that he is dictating terms to Daisy in that conversation
Hmm.
and not allowing her own agency shows that
Yes.
he's basically a mirror image of Tom. It's just that you're going to change
Right.
pages. And so that
Right.
is, I'm glad that we're talking about this, because I think that if you're going to launch a character study of Daisy, which I think it's going to be fascinating in your book, I'm sure, you've really got to include that, which is that
Yes.
there's a reason why she bailed out in that hotel room in the
Hmm.
climax of The Great
Hmm.
Gatsby, and it's because she wasn't offered any options.
Right.
None.
Right. Right. And by the way, I don't want to give away the ending of my book. It's it's different.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't give away anything. We want people to buy it.
No spoiler alerts. No spoiler alerts. But there is that still the same sense in that scene that she's got this terribly important decision to make, and on both sides she sees peril.
Yes.
For herself and for her daughter in particular, keeping them together. You really impressed me with how much detail you remember from Gatsby.
Well, I mean, it's the great American novel. It really is the great American novel.
Yes.
I mean, I think that I actually think that there's actually a better selection for that. It's the consensus for the great American novel. I would argue, though, that Herman Wouk's The Caine Mutiny is even better. I mean, we could talk about that at length, but I think that is actually the great American novel, especially the great American post-industrial novel, which of course, because of the wide scope of it, and I think that the central character, whose name escapes me at the moment, which also I think is a stand-in for Herman Wouk himself, is a personification of America, which is to say, fat, self-indulgent, totally immature, going into World War II, and going through the crucible of World War II, becomes a very worldly, very grounded, mature, and much grimmer character than.
I'm trying to remember that. I haven't read The Caine Mutiny in a long time. Was the character you're talking about, was he played in the movie by Van Johnson?
No, that was
Eddie Albert.
No, he was played by he died young. It was sort of like it's going to be a springboard into movie stardom. I mean, I think he ended up dying young and didn't do much after that, before he passed away. I'm trying to remember the name of the character, and it will come to me sometime around 2:00 in the morning. I promise not to call you.
And then you'll forget it when you wake up.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I mean, but Gatsby and The Caine Mutiny, I think, talk about very different parts of America and are great American novels for different reasons.
Yes.
But so, yeah, I mean, I think that you can't understand the desire for upward mobility and the obstacles that are the soft obstacles, the obstacles that nobody talks about.
Yes.
Unless you've read The Great Gatsby and understand The Great Gatsby, especially if you know the context of Fitzgerald's life. And so, yeah, I am. I'm a fan of the book. So that's the reason
he was so good at capturing that sense of never quite being good enough, not just in The Great Gatsby, but in some other things that he wrote. And I have to say this about him, which I like. I'm a fan of Fitzgerald. I'm not so much a fan of Ernest Hemingway.
You and me both. I've never actually gotten the Hemingway thing. I really haven't. I know he's talented and I know he had a really interesting life, but it just doesn't interest me.
I think I've read A Farewell to Arms like 5 times trying to like it. But the thing that I like about Fitzgerald is that he uses Zelda a lot, his wife Zelda, for models for the women in his books.
Yep.
And he always treats those women characters as if they are beautiful creatures. And he doesn't demean them. Whereas I think Hemingway was not the same way about the women in his life. And
no, I think you're right about that. By the way, Willie Keith was the name of the main character in The Caine Mutiny. And it was played by, I will tell you in just a second. It's not that this came, Robert Francis was his name, was the actor's name. And again, very short career. He died at 25 in an airplane crash,
Wow.
and it was not
Wow.
long after the movie was released.
Mhm.
And I'm not. This is not me having marvelous powers of recall. This is me doing Wikipedia while we're talking. So,
Yeah, I can kind of see there looking at it. Well, now I'm going to have to reread the Cane Mutiny.
well, I mean, I don't want to get too far off of Daisy. We're probably going to need to wrap this up here in a minute anyway.
Okay.
I mean, this is my argument for the Cane Mutiny being the great American novels. It really does. The arc of Willie Keith in this, who's a mama's
Mhm.
boy, who is just pampered and indulged and completely immature and
Mhm.
irresponsible, who is coddled and protected into an officer program for the Navy.
Mhm.
After he actually stands up to his mother once and says, "No, I'm not going to work in Washington. I want to be part of the war effort."
Mhm.
This is the arc of America prior,
Yes.
through the war.
Yes.
We were really, putting aside the Depression, we're sort of a self-indulgent, isolated, not terribly interested in anything else but ourselves kind of country.
Mhm.
And by the time you get done with World War II, we've become the leader of the free world
Yeah.
in a very real sense. The pretense is over.
Mhm.
American power is replacing the British Empire in
Mhm.
terms of, Pax Americana. And we became a lot more serious as a country.
Mhm.
In Welk's telling of this. And so when you read the Cane Mutiny, you really have to see it through the whole thing. And people who haven't read this, who've only seen the film, which the film is fabulous. The film is
Yes.
only a narrow slice of the book. It's
Right.
only a narrow slice of the book. It is about much more than this. And one of my dreams, if I won $1 billion tomorrow, Libby, I would I would make two different limited series. I would produce two different limited series. One is a redoing of The Scarlet and the Black, because I think that's a fascinating story. And Gregory Peck was in that, by the way, and it was fun. But
Uh-huh.
I'd like to do it as a mini series. But the other is to do a mini series of the entire book of the Cane Mutiny, because I think it's very
Okay.
good. Yeah.
Well,
And let's talk about your book, though.
and maybe you could make a mini series of my book too.
I would love that. That'd be
With those
like
billions. Yes.
if I win $1 billion, Libby, make sure you catch up with me, and I will
Yes.
promise you,
If you remember me.
you're unforgettable, and I'm sure Daisy will be as well. So tell us where people can find Daisy.
You can find it on all the major book e-tailers, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, of course, Kobo, Apple,
Okay.
and some bookstores might be stocking it in this day and age. I'm published by a small press, so sometimes you have to order it to get it in, but it'll be available in hardcover next month. And it is available right now digitally. So if you have Kindles or Nooks or read on a tablet, you can find it.
Well, there you go. And Libby, where can people find you?
LibbySternberg.com.
Oh, that's pretty easy. LibbySternberg.com.
Yes. Yes.
So that's ERG, Sternberg, ERG, not URG.
Yes.
ERG. So, that's where you can find Libby. Libby, are you on social media at all?
I am on Twitter as Libby's Books and Instagram.
There you go. So you can find her in all those places, and you can find Daisy in all those places as well. Be sure to check that out. If you loved the story, The Great Gatsby, you'll want to know what Libby envisions for Daisy, which is, again, I think one of the, you said it earlier, a great literary cipher. And
Yes.
I am really, I got to read this book because I'm really curious to see how you laid it out. And so thank you so much.
If you read it, leave a review.
Exactly.
On Amazon or elsewhere.
Make sure to review it. All right. Libby Sternberg, author of Daisy, which is now out. Go check it out. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Ed.
Stay tuned for just a little bit more from the Ed Morrissey Show coming up next. Thank you for watching or listening to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and through the Town Hall Media Player, or you can just come to hotair.com and watch my podcast for free. However, I'd also love to have you join us as members of our VIP and VIP Gold programs. That allows us to defeat the stranglehold that big tech has on information and get you the best information that we possibly can. Plus, we have a lot of new value-added content coming to us from Town Hall Media stars and my good friend Adam Baldwin. He and I are doing the video series, The Amiable Skeptics. It's 1 hour of discussion a week, strictly for our VIP and VIP Gold members. Plus, we have our VIP Gold chat with Kem Edwards every Wednesday afternoon at 1:30 p.m. We'd love to have you as members. Be sure to join up. Thanks again for watching the Ed Morrissey Show podcast.